Hello, this is Jed Brewer with SG Voices and Study Groups. It's really nice to have you on our webinar today. Excited to be talking about better operations with our store managers. So our first part is going to be focused on store management of convenience stores. And then the second part is going to be focused on data trends and consumer spending. And really pleased to have two different presenters on the call. The first is BandyWorks. And they're going to be focused on store managers, and with them are a couple retailers, people like you who are operating stores and are going to be able to speak into some of the tips and tricks that they're doing to make their operations as smooth as possible. And then following that, we're going to have Capital One, which is one of the 10 largest banks in the U.S., and they're going to be speaking a little bit on trends that are taking place in our larger economy and how those are impacting our industry at the same time. So we want this to be super educational for you. We have you on mute, but to the extent you have questions that come up, I know our panelists really want to be able to answer those questions. Please type those into the GoToWebinar framework. I will be able to see those, and I can relay them to the audience members at the appropriate time. We're going to keep this to an hour. It's going to be recorded. We have two different slide decks. We're going to send those slide decks out to you at the end of this. And we hope you have really good takeaways and can go home and improve your businesses off of it. So just real quickly about BandyWorks. So Tom Bandy's here with us, and he'll be presenting in just a second. But BandyWorks helps growing convenience store chains really improve operations by focusing on key areas of growth, those being tobacco, leadership development, control of the store. They simply use store analytics, kind of a methodology with an accountability-focused training and development curriculum, ultimately to help you drive profitability. And then a little bit about Capital One, and we'll introduce them more in about a half-hour time. But as I mentioned, they're one of the 10 largest financial service providers in the U.S. They provide banking to our industry as well as other financial services as well. So we've got a lot of expertise here on the call. In addition, with BandyWorks is Stephanie Galentine, who's the COO at Lassus Brothers, which is a retailer out of the Midwest. And then also Darrell Meek, who's operations manager with Streett and Company, which is a full-line petroleum marketing company, but has convenience stores as well, kind of out of the St. Louis market. So it's really nice to have that study group member retailer perspective here on the call as well. So with that brief introduction, Tom Bandy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to talk to us about store operations, and particularly the store manager, because that's such a critical piece of how we execute and deliver value to our customers. Tell us more about it.
Hey, thanks, Jed. Really pleased to be here. I'm looking forward to that data on the backside of this as well. I saw a little bit of a preview. I know that Stephanie and Darrell talk to me frequently about, how everything goes through the store manager. It's such an important job. And, I know when I was working with Adam Sheets out at their organization, they were growing fast, and they focused so hard on how to help the store managers. And what I really enjoy is seeing how Lassus and Streett have implemented this. So I had this quote, it doesn't really matter how big the store is, a decent manager can make it work. But if you get a bad manager, it's just going to be problems. And so with that, I'd like to just swap over. And I think Darrell and Stephanie, I'm going to leave it to you first. When you think about your store managers and the complexities of their job, would you start off a little bit about how they became a store manager in your organization, and how you help them, and why you think focusing on the store manager is such a big part of your company? Stephanie, I'll let you start. That's right.
Okay. The majority of our managers have moved up through the organization. So most of them, I can't say all, but most of them generally started as part-time or night shift, really to add to their family income, not necessarily be the leading draw of their family income. And the cool thing about our culture is it's hard to leave us, and we really rely on that. So knowing that they come in and learn the fundamentals, it's helpful to us to have that type of growth because they're not missing any of the true elements to serving a customer. They understand all the working components of a store. They understand the importance of safety. They know what we expect as customer service before they're required to then go and lead all of those elements in a store. So throughout all of that, of course, and I'm sure we'll get further into that, but they're certified at different points of their training, and there's a lot of testing and follow-up and follow-through to make sure they're really set to be a good leader before they're asked to be a good leader.
And Stephanie, could you give me just a high level for the audience, roughly how many stores are you guys operating?
Sure. We have 35 locations. We're in Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio. We have 5 locations in Ohio. So we're heavily represented in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's our home base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 35 different store managers. That's a lot to manage, managing the store managers.
Well, we also have 16 food managers. So we have 35 buildings, but we have 50-ish managers.
That makes sense.
And parlaying off of that, Darrell, we had an interesting conversation the other day. You said that, you're a numbers guy and you like your numbers, but you actually don't worry about the numbers at first. You worry about your store managers. Would you just summarize that just a minute? I'd like to, and then I think I tie that back to what you and Stephanie share, what I'm seeing in a lot of these.
So what I mean by that is, the numbers are always important. And yes, I'm a numbers person, and everyone above me is a numbers person for sure. And they want to see, how the stores are performing. But I don't want the managers focusing on numbers. I want the managers focusing on being a leader. Okay, they have to be a leader. I didn't hire a CPA to run the store. I hired a leader to run the store, and they have to be a good leader and develop people under them, because if they don't, there are no numbers. The numbers are bad. So yes, I I don't teach them about the numbers until they've learned to become a good leader.
I love that, and this is where there's a different approach, but this is what I see the value so much. So we've got a list here that's a pretty long list. And Mason and I joke all the time because we both do some work in MBA schools, and we have MBAs on our data team. But we always joke that if we put an MBA in charge of a convenience store, they'd have to have 6 assistants because there's just so many different things going on, and yet we just think these store managers can run with baby call outs, hazardous materials, internet security, and then of course drive profit and growth and keep the customers happy. So Stephanie, if you don't mind, would you rank these 5 bullets, like which one is the only one you want your manager to focus on today, or how would you start that process? I am going to come back to this training thing, and I think you both, training is the wrong word, but leadership piece, just to kind of call out all the complex things that you and Darrell are dealing with.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's chicken and egg for me, but team building and customer experience would be the two. And the only reason I'm leaning to the customer experience is I need to know that they can do that to be a good leader in the industry that we exist in. So if I could smash those two together, that would be my leading. Because to Darrell's point, the rest of it comes in to play if you've got those two components.
Well, exactly. And Mason and I, sometimes we get asked to help. Sometimes we're doing numbers. Sometimes we're helping with data integrations. But, one of the first things we typically ask before we help is like, what's the store like? How long's the manager been there? And what's their turnover like? And so, Darrell, you cut me off one time when we were talking about orders, and you said, Tom, I think you got it backwards. And I believe you said it's people first, even before you worry about the financial piece. And maybe I'm asking the same question again. I don't know.
I mean, it is, and I agree 100% with what Stephanie said. It starts with the customer experience and then team building, because those lead to the staff retention, which leads to the operations and the financial performance improving. But yeah, it has to start with the people and the customer service. Um, I'm a firm believer that I cannot teach anybody how to be a leader. People are born leaders. You're either a leader or you're not. From age 5 on, you're either a leader or you're not. You're the person that takes over in grade school and organizes the baseball game out in the backyard, or you're the person that gets called and said, "Hey, do you want to play baseball in the backyard?" That's the traits I look for as we monitor our employees' growth, because just like Stephanie said, 90% of our managers have started as a cashier. In fact, when we have to hire a manager from the outside, I just tell everybody I failed because we didn't develop our people. So they're either a leader or they're not. So that's what we look for. That's where the customer experience and the team building come in.
So it's almost counterintuitive to what we just said, right? So they're born, but yet I know you spend a lot of time with your managers coaching, and I think it's still development even though they're born that way. Can you reconcile those two for me?
So when I say they're born a leader, that doesn't mean that they've mastered the task. So what I mean by that is they have the ability to grow as a leader. So everyone, including me, and I've been with J Street 33 years. Okay, I still learn every day how to be a better leader. So that's what I do is I encourage them to learn, to grow, um, to become a better person, and that in turn makes them a better leader.
So I was on a call today with somebody that's got a shrink problem, and they've already fixed it once, and that tears up an organization. And Mason was on some calls with newer people that were nervous about the numbers, even to the point where they said, "Well, these grades and things that you're giving us, is that so you can get rid of us?" And so I don't know, Mason, if you want to jump in. I know, Stephanie, that's something that's really big in your culture. So I want to kind of come back to that culture aspect. How do you build the culture? How do you do the growth and the discomfort? And how do you blend that and make that happen? So if you don't mind, Mason, I remember that story you had. It was kind of an anomaly, but that's the reality as you go through this. So if you're listening in, these two here with us have mastered this process. Mason, if you don't mind, just a short introduction. We'll bring it back to Stephanie.
Yeah, that was a newer one that had come up. A manager was really nervous that we were looking at the numbers, and when we think about numbers, we're like, oh yeah, numbers. We're going to compare it. We're going to see where we're going wrong, and then we just, we can get off on a roll looking at numbers. But what I end up spending a lot of time doing is connecting the numbers to the customer service, and also reassuring numbers, especially with operators like Darrell and Stephanie. They're not the type of operators who are going to see a number going down and go try to hammer the manager into submission. They're going to coach them on what's going wrong and what the problem is. And so we end up spending a ton of time connecting that number, whether it's up or down, to their influence in the store with their teams and with their interactions with the customers. And we got a hit because we didn't explain that very well to that particular manager. And she had some strong feedback and some concerns around it. So it can be a delicate balance sometimes when you're introducing new concepts.
Stephanie, is that enough, or can I complicate my question to you? I could wait if you're ready, because I know that culture piece is such a big part of your organization, and yet that same comfort is you have growth, which is again one of these hard to reconcile pieces.
Yeah, so I actually have a couple of thoughts on this. First is this is the only industry I've been in. So I've been in C-store my whole life. So for 30 years, I've watched moments where we will have a really good non-management team member. They are a superstar, they perform, they've got the energy, they are great with customers, they've got all the components of a leader. And then we will throw them into that leadership without that coaching, that training, that encouragement, and that base to work from, and they really struggle, right? And one of the things they struggle with is, I was the superstar. I know everything, I can do everything, I'm the best at everything, and now we've completely uprooted them from their confidence and their skill set that they know they have, and that they thrive on and identify with. And we put them into this crazy leadership world where if you have 10 people, you have 10 personalities, right? And so it's just a flip of the page that can really hurt an ego, can really diminish a confidence, and it's really hard to come back from that. So one of our focuses and intentions is to not do that to your people, right? And some of that is the layering of leadership and the certification and the trainings that we provide, kind of stacking those thoughts and theories, because they're not skills. Some of them are skills, but oftentimes it's an attitude, it's a confidence, it's the experience of talking to a team member about difficult things, such as something that's happening outside of a home that's affecting the work environment. So it's really just being a good human to another human, but not depleting yourself. And so all of that is up in the air, and it's all a free-for-all. And so that's something for us. We're not perfect at it. I've seen it throughout the years, but it's something that we try to focus on. With leaders, I think, so it's complementary to what Darrell said earlier, but I would go as far as saying I think everyone can be a leader if they're motivated to be. So they certainly need coaching. They certainly need depth and structure and support. A lot of people don't trust themselves to do a good job with things. And so there's a lot of hesitation and unwillingness to go in the deep waters or be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think if you can overcome that part with a person, regardless of what generation they come from or their history, I think they have the potential, but they have to want to do it. And sometimes that's a slow burn, and sometimes we strike out a couple of times. But I would argue that everybody can be, with the right motivation and inspiration, if they want it. If they don't want it, that's fine. You need those kinds of humans too, that just want to do a good job and go home, clock out, and leave work behind.
Oh gosh, I got like 3 or 4 points I just want to bring in from watching this over the last 3 or 4 years of doing, thousands of these different sessions. And so the cheat is teaching that really good person that just got promoted to store manager. The cheat to get them to delegate, right? If you're going to focus on one thing, they got to learn how to delegate. And then I do want to come back to that comfort versus discomfort and the total fear. But I also know for those that are here, I'm guessing that the people here are retail operations people or owners who have that responsibility. What I see that works so well is when it starts at the top and comes down, that we're going to be okay here. That sets the tone and makes that discomfort and that willingness more open, because they've especially when they've come up through the ranks. So those are the 2 cheats I'd leave you with. I know we're coming to the last 5 to 6 minutes here. The biggest thing I get from people is like, my store managers are so busy, I cannot put one more thing on them. And they already know how to do this. What the heck would we do with a coaching session or spending time for training or following up or having our supervisor come in? They're just too busy. I can't add anything else to them.
Is that for me?
I'm going to let you or Darrell just jump in, because I think it's
Cool.
the hardest thing for people listening to figure out.
Go ahead, Darrell.
I would agree. That's the number one thing I hear from anybody when I roll out any program is, how am I supposed to do that? How do I have time to do that? Or where am I going to, what space do I have if you're talking about merchandise or stuff? But when you're talking about their time, you know, but you have to make time. It's, if you don't make the time, you're not going to improve. I said that, we get this leader and we're developing them, and then we're going to tell them, no, we don't want to invest any more time in you. That would be a terrible message for us to send. So yeah, we do. We say, we're going to do this and we're going to try to improve that. And, that takes time, and that takes some investment on their part. But you said something about delegation. That's the thing. The first thing I say to a manager when they say, I don't have time for that, I'll say, okay, what can we delegate off of your plate to make that time? There's time there. You just got to find it, and you got to make time for it. And it's worth every penny, every hour that it takes to make them a better person.
Hmm.
Actually,
Step.
Tom, if you guys don't mind, I'd like to read to you something that a manager sent me.
Yeah, go right ahead. Then
It'll only
Stephanie, I'm
take a
curious.
minute.
Yeah.
It'll only take a minute. This is word for, I have not edited this. This is straight off of my phone. I got this morning. Of our 18 managers, this manager has been with JD Streett the least amount of time. We bought their location and I have been working with that person. And this is what I got today. We were talking about how to improve yourself and your team. Okay. Quote, if a teammate, new or old, is not doing their best, whether it be not up to your standards or just not doing what they should be doing, I would think about a variety of things. Does this teammate need reassurance, guidance, or just having a bad day? Having a conversation is very important. Working one-on-one with them, make sure that you ask them if they understand, or even if they have them do whatever you are needing done in front of you and guide them in the correct direction. Showing someone more than a few times is not uncommon. You have to have patience to be a leader. People should be inspiring to help each other and not just to leave it to figure out. Delegating tasks and jobs is very important. Delegating tasks and jobs, oh, sorry, I'm repeating myself. Delegating also should come with a thank you and a positive feedback. If they did a bad job, you should still say thank you, but maybe we do it this way next time. And that came to me this morning, and that's because we were having a conversation with that manager on how I wanted to know how she has become such a great leader so fast.
Huh.
And that was her response.
Stephanie,
Unedited.
thank you. That is awesome. And it's like the thrilling part of this, right? Because it's such a feel good story every day. It's like watching a Hallmark movie when you go out and work with
And
right?
and I wanted to, Stephanie actually made a comment that made me want to read that. You know, you have to, they're going to make mistakes. They're all going to make mistakes. I want them to make mistakes. That's how people grow. If you don't make mistakes, you're not going to get any better. There's no repercussions for managers when they make a mistake if they're trying to make their location better.
No
So that's our
repercussions.
culture, the
No.
freedom to make mistakes.
Stephanie, I've got to turn it back to you, but I want to jump in and make sure we cover this slide for those that are trying to justify and change some things at their organization for leadership development. But I know you want to jump in there.
You can tell by my face, can't you?
Yeah.
Just to kind of piggyback with Darrell, when it comes to investing in training and even repeat training, I think sometimes messages have timing to them, right? So I might hear it in the spring and it not really touch what's going on in my world. So it really is kind of a throwaway lesson or thought. And then come fall, I'm literally in the middle of something, and that very same training could hit differently, right? And also as an organization, if I'm not willing to protect the calendar and put space in the calendar and bring people together from their typical daily calendar and make time for training, then my words aren't matching my actions. And so again, to what Darrell was saying, if it doesn't come from the top, and we don't make it important, and we don't provide for it to happen on a regular basis, and a lot of it's layering, you're adding a theory to the last three theories. If we don't make space for it, then we're not practicing what we're preaching. And so I think, one of the slides referenced turnover. I can't even begin to count how many people I know are still here, not because they love punching a register and not because they love cleaning a bathroom every hour, but because they feel like they're part of something bigger and they feel appreciated and they feel like they're invested and they feel like individually they're important to me, they're important to their supervisor, they're important to our ownership. And that can't just be messaging, right? It has to be the messaging and the action. So anyone listening, it is very messy. It does not have a number and a profit generator to it that you can throw on a financial, but 100% it changes all aspects of the customer's experience. And ultimately, right, that's what we should be here for, is to make sure that that customer wants to go nowhere else. We give them no other option because it's not just a gas price. It's not just a fabulous donut or breakfast sandwich. It's the whole community and environment. So it's It's expensive, it's time consuming, but it's absolutely worth it.
And I agree 100% with everything she just said.
It's training fully and providing that opportunity. And people don't leave companies, they leave their manager, is what everybody knows. So thank you so
Real
much.
quick,
I know,
piggyback on that question. Two people in the audience effectively asked the same question, but you got all these employees, maybe they're cashiers, CSRs. How do you identify those leadership capabilities to know who should be that store manager?
Stephanie, you want to go first?
Can you repeat that? How do you identify who you should go after for
right.
leadership?
Yeah.
Okay. We're a little different. A lot of our training and then opportunities really are open to the masses. So again, that's kind of messy, okay? So you can volunteer to participate in a lot of our trainings. It's not required, and that brings forward leaders. And if they keep coming back and they keep being fed, it kind of just becomes a reality. We see it, they see it, and then we have job openings that open up to the entire company. So we know who we expect will show up, but we are always surprised by one or two that weren't on our radar. And we've actually begun doing that because we experienced the injury of not doing that in the past. Prior generations, we didn't do that. We offended people. We lost people because we didn't have an open format. And so it's kind of a free-for-all. It has boundaries. But if there's a job posting, you don't have to be in a certain department or so much tenure. Anybody can apply. And then it's just a little extra lifting on leadership end. But so far, we're happy with the results.
And we are very similar. So we have a saying that we hire for attitude to begin with. So we actually start doing an interview process. Even if we're hiring for a sales associate, the veteran managers can identify someone that they think could be a possible. We have different titles: team lead, assistant manager, food lead, whatever that may be. So we start there, and then there are actions in the store. And the same thing, we do the exact same thing Stephanie does. We post every position, and it matters not to me where they come from, how much experience, or how they've been. I have taken a part-time sales associate and promoted them all the way to store manager and skipping everything in between if they're the best person. So we do the same thing. We post every position and encourage people. I will even interview people I know they're not going to get the job because I want them to go through the process, and I turn the interview into a coaching session and say, you're not quite ready for this, but this is what you need to work on. And that's, it sounds silly, but it usually works.
Wow. Yeah. No, we do the exact same thing. Anybody that's declined gets coaching, and then we'll say these are your training opportunities that should help you get the next opportunity.
I just recently had to promote a district manager, and I had 3 qualified candidates, and they were all very equal, and I made my choice. The other two managers, they don't really need a whole lot of training. So what I did is I gave them side projects to work on because I'm lazy and I delegated stuff that I didn't want to do. So I gave them each a side project, and they're working on it, and they have taken with it and run with it, and it's going to help in their development to become the next district manager.
Well, Darrell, Stephanie, thank you guys so much for sharing that, your experience as retailers, and Tom and Mason, your experience in working with retailers. I think, Tom, you summed it up really well. That store manager is such a critical component to make everything run within a store. And people work at places because they enjoy who their boss is. And if they can do it right and execute things and make the people underneath them feel valued and the customer feel valued, it's going to lead to a lot of good things. So hopefully at the audience, you were able to take away some tips and tricks from Stephanie and Darrell of things that they're doing, and Tom and Mason at BandyWorks as well. We're going to change gears really quick to our friends at Capital One and have them talk a little bit about more of the state of the industry of what's going on. We were talking some about data, but doing a data deep dive with customer fundamentals, what's happening with spending, and the impacts and trends of all that on the C-Store channel. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason Noll, who's the vice president at Capital One Bank. And we also have Michael Blommer on the call and Colin as well, who are also with Capital One. So really appreciative to be able to have their experience. As I mentioned, Capital One is a a top 10 financial services institution in the United States, and they're out there to help you as study group members grow your businesses, whether you're needing a major capital purchase, to do an acquisition, or just get a variety of traditional loans. They're there to help you do that. So, Jason, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to start doing a deep dive into the convenience store channel.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jed. And thanks everyone for joining. I'm Jason Noll. I'm with Capital One's Commercial Bank. I've got nearly 30 years of experience in financial services, and for more than 10 of those years have been covering the retail and wholesale fuel distribution space. I'm sure all of you know Capital One from our commercials, but may not have realized our scale and size of the commercial bank until today. You know, when I think about Capital One in the world of banking, we're kind of the new kid on the block. And one of the things that makes us unique is our specialization in verticals and really our focus on data and trends within those verticals. I've been a big fan of study groups and their approach for many years, so I'm pretty excited to be a part of this today and happy to have Mike and Colin joining us from our team. I know they have some interesting data and analysis put together for us, so with that, I will turn it over to them.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for having us. And thanks for that last 30 minutes. We finance a lot of different types of consumer retail businesses, restaurants, and, the number one determinant of per store profitability is not even where you're located or what you're selling. It's the tenure of your general manager. So the conversation before strikes home. Mike and I are a little more on the numbers side and the scorekeeping side of these industries. And through this presentation, hopefully just give you a benchmark of where we stand from a consumer perspective. That is relying on a lot of our data internally here at Capital One as a large credit card company and as basically a subscriber to Nielsen data. So we're going to try to get you a viewpoint of not only what's going on with that macro consumer, but what's working in the channel and what's not from a sales perspective. So with that, we'll get going. So really, we look at the macro backdrop, and we're going to show you some numbers, but it's been truly unprecedented, right? We had a pandemic that shut down retail trade. We had some of the largest stimulus checks targeted across consumers in the economy. Those checks arguably drove the biggest step up in consumption in the shortest period of time that the economy's ever faced. Arguably, that led to some inflation pressures, which pushed a bunch of pricing through the economy. And frankly, a lot of businesses priced. And as painful as it was, they did do a pretty good job of protecting their dollar profits. And since then, the consumer's been quite weak, really. We pushed demand very fast, and it's been very hard to lap that level of increased demand. And we've measured that across retail, different types of retail. We've measured that at the food at home channel, the food away from home channel. It's been very hard to grow volumes over the last couple of years in those channels. And we would argue we're at an inflection point today, and we're probably on the more bullish side of the picture. We don't see overall in the C-store channel, there is some volume degradation, but in most channels, we're not seeing volume degradation, so the consumer is strong. And we also believe that the consumer is gestating that inflation. So if we measure wages or what people are paid on a cumulative basis, that's caught up above inflation. And that's a key insight because it's really painful to go to Chipotle and spend $15 when it used to be $10 or $11. But over time, your wages have caught up. And just like it was in 1970 when the can of Coke went from 25 cents to 45 cents, consumers gestate into that new level of inflation. And we're kind of at that tipping point. So to back that up with some numbers and some pictures here, you can kind of just see the pain of this cycle, right? So commodities took off and commodities went faster than pricing at different retail, and that caused a margin squeeze. And even worse than that is retailers and food manufacturers had to start taking pricing before wages took off. So we put a bunch of money in people's pockets. If you see those light green shaded areas, that were the stimulus payments. But after that, no one really got a raise very quickly. So we had inflation hitting the economy. We had commodities moving up. Businesses had to take price. But it was a real scary time because those wages had not caught up to that price. And it came back down. Pricing kept going up. If you follow that dark red line, that's your commodities. Pricing comes back up. It catches up. Profitability comes back. But still, those wages have not caught up to that level of inflation. And our argument is here in 2025 and in parts of 2024, the consumer's in a much stronger position because, frankly, their incomes have caught up to those levels of inflation, and that should allow them to continue to spend at a higher rate compared to the period, where you're stuck in the middle where your wages had not caught up to that inflation. Yeah, so the next point is, consumption went up. But frankly, we've been in a very tough period where ever since we spent a lot of money with those transfer payments, right, in line with COVID, it's been very hard to lap that. So we saw very flat and negative trends across all retail, saw it at the grocery store, saw it at the restaurant channel. And frankly, we believe that we've seen a lift in the numbers over the last 12 months. We've seen some improvement in restaurant volumes and sales. We've seen some improvement at the grocery store as well in terms of volumes. And that gives us more confidence as we head into 25 and 26. And our weekly data and our monthly data, despite all the talk about tariffs and the disruption after the implementation of quote unquote Liberation Day, has not shown much real slowdown in economic activity. So we continue to be, fairly confident, at least following the data at this point, that we've not seen any disruption. So really, if you think the way that the economy works in the consumer economy. So the U.S. is like a $30 trillion economy, and about 2/3 of it is actually consumer spending. And consumer spending is fueled by real wage growth, so people fundamentally making more every year, inflation adjusted, and then spending that money. So one person's spending is another person's job, which is another person's spending, which is another person's wage, right? And the U.S. economy is fueled by, on an inflation adjusted basis, consumers consuming more every year. And it doesn't feel right, but over the long term, consumers have consumed about 2% more a year. And real incomes have risen at about that same rate. So this is kind of the magic of that big 2/3 consumer economy. China doesn't have that right now. They would love to have a strong consumer base to really drive the economy. The U.S. stands out when you look across the world. During COVID, again, we put these transfer payments in people's pockets, and the people went out and spent those, and it juiced the economy like it was supposed to. The first one brought back demand to trend line level. If you see that big dip, that was the big dip in COVID, and now we're back. We also did 2 more transfer payments after that people went out and spent. That was great while it lasted, but it's been a heck of a new lap to lap the next year and the next year. So we've seen negative trends ever since then. And what we witnessed in the data that's on this line is the spending finally caught up, or incomes caught up and spending caught up. And that relationship between about 2% growth more in wages on a real basis and spending on a real basis resumed. And we think it's underpinning the stable data that we've been seeing in the consumer. And this juxtaposes on the next slides to what a recession looks like, because a recession does not look like that people don't continue to get paid at first. It's when the spending slows down. So if you look at 08, 09, you look at 01, the spending is what started to stop. And then 9 months later, we found ourselves in a recession. So our call would be that the recession risk is quite low until we see these spending numbers really start to stagnate. And we've not seen that to date. So again, despite all the headlines, and I think with all the disruption out there, whether you're for it or against it, the narrative or the data is not matching the narrative that the consumer is weak. Now, confidence is very weak. So when people don't feel great, but they're still spending. And I think the better indicator, we've had weak periods of confidence that has not translated to weaker spending. So until we see that data around weaker spending, we continue to be quite bullish that we don't end up in, a massive spending-driven macro recession. The other thing that's different this time is the balance sheet of most middle and upper income consumers is very strong. So we look at this on the previous slide as a percentage of your income. So right now, people's savings net of their debt is about 7 or 8 times their income. And that's really the highest level it's been in 30 or 40 years. So there's better cushion today. And then we look at the loan to value. So in '08, we had a lot of debt, right, at the consumer level, and that didn't turn out to be so good. So we don't see the same amount of leverage on the consumer balance sheet as well. So even if we get a slowdown, our call or our intuition at this point would be that the consumer has the dry powder to, if the job market, say, gets worse, um, uh, they have the dry powder to kind of sustain that better than what we saw in '08. So we don't think we get a second order big slowdown like the '08 side that was really driven right by the leverage and at the consumer level, especially in the housing market.
Colin, a quick question. One of the things I hear from our retailers a lot, they serve a particular demographic on average, which tends to be a lower income demographic. And, we look at averages for the economy, macroeconomy as a whole, the typical consumer, but it feels that there's an increasing bifurcation between the top 10% and, the bottom 50 or whatnot. Do you see, as it relates to retail, any impact of that, pain that at the bottom of the class is feeling as it relates to sales, say, in a convenience store?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the transfer payments were the greatest thing to lift spending across all income quartiles or quintiles, however you want to measure it, because that money just went into people's pocket and got spent. The lower end, we did, and I'll let Mike chime in too if he can get off mute. But the lower end actually has held up pretty well. Last year we started to see some weakness. And it's hard to say, like a lot of people say, hey, the dollar channel's not doing well. Well, is the dollar channel not doing well because of online or because of, there's better retailers or consumers are accessing retail in a different way, right? Drug channel not doing that great right now, so some of it can be kind of secular around the channel, but the low end consumer actually through this has held in pretty well. We saw some weakness last year. Mike, can you jump on and kind of fill that out for everybody?
Yeah, are you guys able to hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good. I think one thing that's fairly striking is just looking at the delinquency rates. So there's been a lot of headlines about the increase in delinquency rates really through the inflation period. And largely what happened there was a normalization back to what we saw pre-COVID. So a lot of people got these transfer payments and both spent them and used them to pay down debts. We saw delinquencies pull back pretty reasonably. And that started to come back to a normal level. And really what we've seen over the last 4 to 5 months is we've peaked in delinquencies and the bottom end consumer is actually getting healthier. We're also seeing this through pay rates. People are paying off more of their credit card every month. And we're seeing it cash deposits. So consumers across all income bands, we don't have the data on the page, but we use this from our bank account tracking internally. Consumers across all income bands have picked up cash and have scaled their cash levels at a real level beyond the amount of inflation that we've seen from 2019. So there's a lot of debt pay down. There's some cash on hand, so we're feeling pretty good about where the low end consumer is. Although there is the question mark of if they continue not to spend and they continue to just pay down debt and accumulate cash, that's not sustainable either. We need to get them out to spend. So while there has been some softness on the spending side, we don't think it's driven by an overall increasing level of stress. In fact, I think the opposite is bearing out through the delinquency data that we're seeing on the right-hand chart.
And Jed, this, there's some other economists that are talking about this. The impact of COVID and that bump in consumer spending did not just go away, right? I mean, there was years of it kind of bleeding out of the economy, basically. And I think it's been fairly negative spending wise across all income quintiles, quartiles, however you want to cut it. I mean, people have not bought a washing machine in 5 years, so there's a lot of people, I think, trying to answer the question, trying to do it by incomes, and that there's a big differential. When we cut the data internally around, do people across different incomes have as much money in the bank as other people do, or that cushion that's there? We don't see the delinquency rates and people that carry credit card balances above normal rates. So it seems to be that it's stronger than the narrative out there. If the job market gets weaker and you have people with less of a cushion, I could see that starting to hit that lower end consumer even more. So we'll have to, it might be more levered to the performance of the job market, which is still very good going forward.
Yeah, well, that's encouraging to me
Great.
that you're feeling strong, because you do read the press and the narrative is fairly negative, particularly recently. So I'm glad the data is holding up as well as you're.
Yeah, because it was the delinquency data was so good and so low, and then it went back to normal, and that was the OMG moment. And you got a lot of people writing about it. Our observation is, frankly, it just is normalized. And the Morgan Stanley economist was saying this the other day. It's like, the economy's not been that great because it's been coming off this COVID lap of a lot of things. People have not bought a durable, think washing machines, for a number of years now because the replacement cycle got pulled forward when everybody bought that stuff. So I still think it's more COVID normalization but that doesn't make for a great news story every day, right? So we just, our research is really pointing to still a normalization period, and frankly, we think incomes have caught up to inflation, which is a good thing for spending going forward. But we'll see how that plays out as the year goes forward. Mike, if we go to the next slide. So if we get into our industry, in the food industry, I think, in particular the beverage industry, I mean, the sales at these stores and convenience stores, right, is so levered to that industry. And how do we understand what goes on there? About half of the industry sales is calories, right? Getting people fed. But the other half of the sales in the industry, or the money that people spend, is really based on brands, is based on packaging, is based on consumers paying up for quality, is based on consumers paying up for convenience. So we're not like, the food industry, the beverage industry, it's not that we're just feeding America. That's only about half the sales, to gain those calories. The other half is marketing, right? Is brands, is value prop. And the C-store channel is like really levered to that. I mean, squarely in the beverage space, and the growth trends and the trajectories there, and the big shifting landscape and the growth that is frankly there. In the tobacco space, very similar. In the alcoholic beverage space, and even in the food space, right? So the value that the C-store channels bring is really, what is the value prop to consumers in terms of time, in terms of quality, and consumers investing that time in your all stores. And that's really right where you want to be. The ability to have a store where you can get the right selection that talks to consumers to drive traffic, where you can add the prepared food offerings that drive traffic. You're just not in the calorie business. You're really in the consumer experience business. You're in the value added business, taking time out of people's eating routines. And you're in the branded business, having the right brands on shelf. And frankly, again, that's right where you want to be.
A question for you guys. I've heard increased talk about it among retailers, but the Ozempic revolution, or whatever the formula is for all the knockoffs, but people consuming less calories, maybe to moving more healthy options. Is that on your guys' radar at all? And are you seeing anything in the data related to that?
Yeah, it definitely is. I believe the drugs from a pharmaceutical standpoint are not only work, and are here to stay. And from a pharmaceutical business model, it's a very good business model because they're a high price drug that you continue to have to take. And I think the healthcare industry is going to have to keep reimbursing it. So there's a lot of headlines about GLP-1s changing the world. Now, what does it mean for our industry, and consumers that go on it, and how big is that impact? So I think the first thing you have to think about is it's a 1-year calorie hit. So you go on the drug and you stop eating about 15% from a calorie perspective of what you did before. It's not every year you eat 15% less. It's that first year you eat 15% less. So with that thinking, nobody knows the exact numbers, but we've put 6, 7, 8% of the population on these drugs kind of over the last 18 months. And we've had probably the biggest proportion of people on a 1-year period go on the drug and have that calorie come out of our channel. Now, people don't stop eating, they also make different choices. So we're seeing in the data, frankly, that higher protein snacks do better. We're seeing some decrease in alcohol consumption. We're seeing shift. And if I know the food industry, because what I just showed you is a marketing machine, we're going to, as an industry, are going to come up with solutions to talk to those consumers. And those consumers are engaged in not eating and eating. So this is not a consumer set that's not engaged, not willing to spend dollars, I think, to align with what their aspirations are being on the drug. So I think it's going to be a real opportunity for the industry. I think probably the hit has hit the hardest over the last 12 months. I don't think we're going to be putting more people on than we have over the last 12 months. More people will join the class of people on Ozempic, but I don't think the magnitude will be as big. And again, it's only a 1-year hit. So oddly, I think we might be through the biggest impact of it, but by no means is it going away. By no means will the industry not have to talk to that consumer. It's going to be part of the strategic playbook going forward. But I think the negative part of it might have actually peaked. And it's very hard with the data. We have survey data of Ozempic users versus non-users. A lot of it is peer influenced if you go on Reddit and read what Ozempic users do and not. So there's still a lot to come, but I think the good news is that these people are still engaged in the industry, just in a different way. And our industry, again, is based on being a solutions provider to people more than it is just feeding calories. And I think that insulates the industry to some degree. And if the second question, I would think would be like impulse purchases, and I think that's where the industry is going to have to figure that out. I think if you have items that are talking to that consumer base, you'll still get quote unquote an impulse purchase, but it's not going to be, McDonald's is saying less breakfast, until they get the offering right, I'm not sure that you're going to be accessing that consumer in the right way. So, but we'll see how it plays out. It's very hard. Just because it's really just survey data of people, not really hard data, and kind of that next level to figure out what the right strategy is going to be. So, Mike, we have a few more minutes here. Let's go. Let's just anchor people on where the dollars have been moving in the C-store channel. So, I mean, here are the big categories, right? So over the last 4 years, this is the sales growth in food, in beverage, in alcohol, and tobacco, and other items, right, in the channel. So there's actually been very strong performance over a multi-year period. We're talking 4 years here in food and beverages. This includes inflation. That's why these numbers are big. And alcohol, it's lagged that, but still positive. Tobacco has been down, and other items have kind of been up, kind of that mid-single digit level. And now really the natural question is what's been working and what's been not in these big categories that really drive sales in the industry. We know the prepared food offerings, which are not on here, are doing well. That's not measured in this data. So we will kind of asterisk that your store performance is also being driven by that and the gasoline dynamics, of course. But, in the stuff we can measure, we just like to give you this insight with the few minutes we have left to kind of what's doing well and not.
Just want to say thank you to our panelists and the expertise that they brought. As you sign off, there'll be a quick question, like rating of this. We want this to be as educational as possible. So give us a sense of what you enjoyed, and we want to make future ones as beneficial as possible for you. So also mark on your calendar, June 19th, Pix Payments and Mako Network. That will be our next webinar that we'll do. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the spring as we start moving into warmer climates for most of you all. And look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again, everybody. Take care.